Simply training your staff doesn't work. Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime Series with me, Kevin Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me today is Leadership and Coaching segment. She's a trainer, speaker, and management and HR consultant. Please welcome to the show, Trudi du Toit. Hello, Trudi. How are you doing?
Kevin, hi. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Trudi, to kick it off, as we always do with all our guests, is tell us just a little bit about you and what do you do?
Kevin, some of my most or greatest claim to fame, shall I say, is some of the management and leadership and supervisory empowerment projects that I've run for companies. That's been a huge game changer for me. I've loved working with these people. I seem to have moved more towards mining and earth moving industries, but it's been across different industries, different teams, different levels, and what I've learned from it has been profound. It really has been a life changer for me and for the people that I'm able to work with, because I'm able to use that stuff in other processes that I run.
As I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, I see that you've been doing this for 24 years.
Yeah, it's been a while. I've kind of lost track.
That's amazing. I started my business in 2015, and so next year's 10 years milestone for me. And it's just been, I've actually, rebranded and done a whole bunch of things. So for 24 years, I know how, it's in your genes, it's in your being after a while.
It is.
You can't do anything but that.
It almost becomes part of your DNA when you realize, hang on, that's what I actually should be doing. And it sometimes takes one a while to figure out what it is that you ought to be doing. Sometimes we fall around a little bit. But I'm grateful to have been able to engage with people at such a level.
One of the things it mentions is she unlocks solutions, helps managers build bridges, and leaders find missing puzzle pieces. Yep. So, I mean, just to start off that conversation, we are here on the show to enable, uplift, and educate, and just be the sounding board very often for people who are in business, people who are leading others. What are some of the biggest challenges that managers struggle with, and how are you seeing this struggle happening? Is there an obvious struggle that people generally have, or do you notice that in the times we live in, heading into the new generations coming into corporates, and we're moving into this AI kind of era? What are some of those challenges?
Not knowing how to work with people, how to relate to them, how to build relationships, how to bring out the best in people. Sometimes managers just don't know how to manage the team for optimal results, and they've been appointed into that position. So there's the assumption that, of course, automatically they know how to do this, but there's no knowing that. I often deal with supervisors who tell me horrific stuff that their managers are getting up to. There's a certain young man that's also been renting premises from us, and just in chatting to him, he works for a very large car dealership, and his manager is, I'm astounded that he actually manages to keep the team together that he's got. Just the things that I have to hear is just unbelievable. It's just not really knowing how to work with people, and when it comes to some of the most important things in business, like passing on the baton, identifying the next generation of leaders and equipping them, it's not even in their minds. It doesn't even feature. The focus is on profit. The focus is on getting through this day. The focus is on dealing with all the stuff maybe that they shouldn't even be dealing with, but they think they do.
Yeah, I love that. Just the sentiment that people they simply don't know how. And there's almost an illogical approach that corporates take to kind of saying, well, you're the leader, make this happen, motivate people, get the numbers, get the results. But yet, like you say, people simply don't know how. Part of my understanding, and from my experience already working in this similar space, is I'm at that point where I'm thinking each organization should have a permanent human facilitator, someone who does a facilitation around getting results for certain aspects and being able to facilitate difficult conversation, someone who facilitates success throughout the organization. Do you think that's part of why we do what we do?
Traditionally, that's the role of HR, but I think HR's role has become convoluted, different, changed. I don't know, yeah, but the point you make is valid, because it's often assumed that your key people actually need less attention, they need less training, less development, but key people need much more support and greater skills. Mm-hmm. The reality is that there's much more that's expected of them, and if you look at their impact on so many people, their results specifically have a far greater impact on the welfare of the company. So, it's a scary thing when organizations assume that, well, he's been successful in the previous role, obviously he'll be just fine in the next role or in the next promotion that we put him into. But each step up that proverbial corporate or career ladder actually presents unfamiliar situations, and one can never assume that what made a manager successful previously will guarantee success in the new position or the new situation. It obviously requires adjustment, new knowledge and skill. And yes, I think that's where some of the work that I've done has come into play, because they've needed somebody to speak to. It's a matter of, this is what's happened. How do I deal with it? And I find that even years later, I'm still in contact with a lot of the managers and the supervisors that I've worked with before, where they'll be in contact with me and say, hi, how's it going? Yeah, this is actually what's come up. You won't believe it. This, and how should I deal with this? So just using me as a soundboard, and that's been very, very rewarding to still remain in contact with those folks. But leadership failure is a big thing. It has a massive impact on business.
Yeah, and to that point, another question that I think is just that leads wonderfully well into that is, so why does training not work? Because essentially, we go, we need to get everybody trained. We need to put everyone through your course material. And I 100% agree with you. Training, if there is not a long-term commitment from an organization to work through a process, training just doesn't work.
Well, training needs context as well. It needs to be undertaken when there's a definite need that's identified. Otherwise, it's training for the sake of training. Why are we doing it? And to enable us to provide content that's actually relevant and applicable to the challenges that the people are experiencing, I usually have them do a training needs questionnaire that I then analyze, and that actually helps to provide a platform where one knows that what you're facilitating is the right thing. But training doesn't work when it's isolated, it's on its own, it's got no context. And some of the biggest problems that we've got is it becomes an on and off crash course. We have a problem, and the problem's with the troops, and then they send the troops, and then you start working with the troops, and then it's within no time you realize the problem's way bigger than with the troops. The problem actually lies right at the top. As they say, a fish rots from the head. So it really needs to be implemented as part of a career path plan, as part of a performance management process where the skills gaps are identified. And when delegates are required to use these new skills that empower them, of course, management needs to be there to follow up, follow through. They need to make sure that there's ongoing coaching that comes from that as well. Otherwise, but if your manager's not equipped to deal with it, then the whole thing just falls flat. And we've often seen where we've worked with supervisors, they're all excited. They want to go back into the workplace. They want to implement the stuff. And the manager just looks at him, gives him a little snide grin and says, well, buddy, your holiday's over. Here it's back to the salt mines. And he cracks the whip and off you go back the way. Nothing has changed. They're not allowed to implement anything. And that is some of the biggest trouble that we've got when the troops get sent, but management's not on board to endorse the process. They don't know what we've done with them. They don't understand what issues have actually come up in the training. So we usually suggest a dual approach. Let's work with your managers and your supervisors at the same time. That way you can achieve maximum results. The stuff will stick. And that's where I've seen good results.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got to a point where I don't do any intervention without a long-term coaching element to that, so that there's a facilitated application of what's being learned, right? It's a necessity. Are you ready to discover your true leadership potential? Head over to www.kevinbritz.com and take our free leadership questionnaire. Whether you're a seasoned executive or an aspiring leader, this quick and insightful tool will help you identify your strengths and unlock areas for growth. Don't miss this opportunity and level up on your leadership game and make an impact. Visit www.kevinbritz.com today, where power meets transformation. What is the impact of management failure on business? Because, it's almost strange that nobody really wants to take accountability to kind of go, okay, well, it's because we did this and we haven't followed through. We haven't changed the culture enough for it to exist. But I mean, from your perspective, why is this?
Kevin, in a nutshell, significant. The impact, the consequences is significant. I remember reading stats a few years ago in a newsletter. I think it was an Accelerating Excellence newsletter. And they claimed that an estimated 40% of all managers fail within their first 18 months on the job. And I thought, really, can this be? And then I started running a number of different projects, and I realized that, whoa, what about the other 60%? And what does failure actually mean? Failure in these studies meant that they would no longer be in their position after 18 months. So they'd either be demoted, terminated, or they'd resign. But what about that other 60%? Because the fact that they no longer, or that they're still holding those positions, those 60%, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily successful.
Yeah.
So, not failing doesn't equal success. So most managers actually seem to be okay when it comes to technical skills. The problem's not with technical skills. The problem lies with the people side of things. And people, someone, I think it was Connie Podesta, once said that life would be infinitely simpler if it weren't for other people. Machines don't fight back. They don't argue. People, different story. And management failure can be found across the board in all businesses, big, small. It's one of the biggest reasons for business failure, and it's probably the number one reason for staff turnover. So if you look at staff turnover, the minute your staff turnover goes up, people leave, your costs go up, your retention goes down, and you've got a big problem on your hands. Before you know it, your business is struggling. Before you know it, you've got sustainability issue. When people don't stick around long enough, there's no continuity. You're constantly looking out to appoint more people to replace those, and that costs. It costs hugely. I don't know if you're familiar. You probably are familiar with what it costs to replace someone. There's been a lot of research and a lot of bits and pieces here and there, but it seems overall approximately double an employee's annual salary. That seems to be the number that's stuck with us now. If you take that into account, what it takes to replace somebody, this is something that you want to get right, the people side of things. It's just going to cost you otherwise.
I would go as far to say as to separate HR from a people specific person. And I don't necessarily think that needs to be a coach or a psychologist, but there has to be someone that's assigned at facilitating and has a people approach that's got nothing to do with process-driven anything, that is specifically working at helping and understanding and encouraging the culture to change around being very human-centric. The more I work with people, as part of one of the cohorts, we run a program for specialist leaders. Probably 80% of what the program is about is human skill. Understanding neuroscience, understanding emotional intelligence, and transaction analysis, and It's very people orientated. Some of the very practical implementation and application that we do in this program is, really being human, understanding the human approach to business and life. And then we touch on strategy and, the VUCA-D world and of how we impact the world in that capacity. But I mean, how would you manage going about creating a career culture in an organization and team? Because I think, as you mentioned, half the time people they don't know how. And then the second part of that is the succession planning of like, how do we get the right person in this job if I'm not here, or if someone important leaves, or if someone resigns, right? How do we create the culture for that?
Well, in a nutshell, simply put, by changing the focus. In most organizations, when focus is so profit-driven, managers get caught up in that. And this individual that you mentioned that is such a key person would probably fill that gap very nicely. When managers get caught up in the whole profitability thing, it shows in the relationships with their teams, with their people. And this is when people start hating their jobs, start hating their managers, and start looking out for something else. And when your staff turnover goes up, your profitability goes down, your business sustainability suffers. Yeah, it's an all-round effect. So there's always a delicate balance between profit and people. And the leadership development framework that I've developed actually provides the tools to shift the focus of managers and to equip them to function more like leaders. And it's in the little things that we do on a daily basis in our interaction with people that we're able to make such radical changes. I don't believe in fancy software programs that help with people processes. There's no shortcut to this. And it's something that needs to happen on a daily basis. It's not something that you can do occasionally once a year or twice a year when you happen to do your performance management or your performance appraisals. If you look after your people, they'll look after your business. That's the principle, and that takes care of profit. So the manager's job is really to do what it takes to ensure that each member of the team has what they need to produce the best possible results. And that means knowing your people, it means understanding them and what works for them. And each one of them is different. There's no one size fits all. So it means connecting with people. It means building trust. I mean, trust is essential as oxygen.
I love that. And the key point as an overall view is change the focus, right? Because if you're focused on just the money, and it's strange when you lead with that intention, people start noticing that all you leading with that intention is to make money and, exclude them from the vision. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've also noticed, from working in certain leadership groups and teams, is the moment there isn't a vision, it's not communicated well enough, or the intention is no one understands the intention, they lose trust. As you mentioned, when there's no trust, teams can't function optimally.
That's right.
Some of the work that you do, don't you want to share some of that with us? Because I know that you do some customized programs, and tell us more about the types of work that you do.
So some of the key work that I do helps managers put the building blocks in place to make sure that they are actually able to ensure the sustainability of their business. And it's in those steps that you actually build up your company, you build up the whole framework that sustains the organization, that keeps people there, that keeps them engaged. If people don't feel like they have a future in the organization, and that usually happens when there's no career path that's set up for them. When there's a career path and he feels like, or she feels like they know where they're going, they know where they stand, they know what they need to do, and there's guidance, and there's a manager who is on their side, who's in their corner, it really changes so much. And that is what I do. I help managers get into the corner of their staff, help them to understand their people. It starts off with simple things, and most of them come into the course and I ask them, so, what do you do on a daily basis? And it's clear that most of them don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They come from possibly a place where they might have been a supervisor, or the supervisor, if it's a supervisor, they come from a place where they've been an artisan. And they've been a jolly good artisan. That's why they got promoted into management position. And he gets there, and now what does he do now? So he defaults back to where he was comfortable, and he takes over the work that his people ought to be doing, that his team should be doing. And it's not true, because, having been promoted into a supervisory position, well, that's a whole different skill set that he now requires, and he probably doesn't have it. And by moving him into a supervisory position without equipping him for it, actually sets him up for failure. And I blame management squarely for that, because they haven't looked at the situation, they haven't assessed it, they haven't equipped this guy, or maybe they don't know how. And that's where that key person comes in that you're talking about. That key person needs to be astute enough to see where the problem lies, needs to understand how to address that problem, take that person by the hand and say, hang on a second, let's take it back a few steps. What's your new job entail now? And that's what we actually do. We go back to key performance indicators. We go back to, what do you get measured on? What do you get paid to do? What are you actually here for? And then we unpack, how does that job change? How has it impacted the way you interact with people? Because now you've got people that argue back. You're no longer working with a machine or a process or something like that. So how do you need to adapt and adjust the way you work on a daily basis? And that's what essentially I do. And that applies to all levels of the organization. Sometimes you see some older guys that have been around for a long, long time, and all they've done is take on old habits from other people. So my boss used to do it this way, or my manager used to do it this way. So obviously, that must be okay. But it isn't always. It might not work for them, and it doesn't work for all people working for him.
I love that you say that it's squarely placed on management roles. And, I have a saying that I live by, purely based on the fact that, the work that I do requires me to work with leaders very often. And, I boil it down to a simple sentiment that a great leader creates great leaders. And,
right.
when you, as a great leader, you're going to be accountable for who's in your charge. You're going to be accountable to how well they function, how well they prosper in their role, how well they can achieve within that role. And if we don't have that sentiment as a great leader, how do I create great leaders? You might be failing as a leader. And many people don't like hearing that. But if we have to break it down into simplicity, how do you measure whether you're doing great leadership or taking a great leadership approach? Well, you would have a legacy of leadership around you. And people would go, well, the reason I do it this well and the reason why I do it this way is based on the fact that I've learned how to do that. Another one that you share is your interactive masterclasses. You do some coaching and you do speaking. Tell us more about that.
So the speaking actually came about as a result of these processes that I do. And every now and then I get somebody who's chases me and says, no, we need somebody to come and speak to us about workplace inclusivity. Strangely enough, that was a recent one. And I said, well, okay, where does that come from? So it was an interesting thing. My daughter, Jenna Evelyn, was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 21. And for 10 years, between ages of 10 and 20, we went to hell and back with this kid several times until we actually established that it was ADHD. And suddenly, I started realizing, hang on a second, there are so many people like this in the workplace, and they cause trouble, and the managers don't know how to deal with them at all.
Yeah.
And it's just awesome, because I sometimes actually involve her in these processes where I say to people, listen, let her come and speak to you just for a few minutes so that you understand what life is like for somebody with ADHD. And incidentally, it's not all bad news. they have this incredible thing called hyperfocus, which actually equips them and enables them to get a lot of work done in a short space of time if they're committed and interested and engaged. And I've learned that from her. So there are a number of things that workplaces can do to become a lot more inclusive when it comes to folks like that. And it's a different take. I mean, inclusivity normally deals with gender and race and things like this. So neurodiversity is a totally different angle from that. But that was one of the areas where speaking comes in. Coaching comes about from these processes. I believe that people have to take away stuff and implement it in the workplace. And a lot of the people I work with, when I start working with them, I say, so what kind of a manager are you? Or what kind of a supervisor are you? No, I think I'm doing okay. We're all, it's like... It's like the original sinner. I'm okay. And I say, okay, well, let's have a look at how okay you really are. Here is a survey for you. Take it, give it to your team. No names. This is confidential. You get the information back and you come and tell us next time round what you learned from that. And they come back the next time looking rather sheepish. It's I realized that maybe I'm not as shit hot as I thought I was. These are the areas that my people actually pointed out to me that they really struggle with me. So that is the first wake-up call. It's quite an adjustment. And from there, they take away certain tools that they have to implement. I'm talking now about processes that run over a period of time. I like working with companies over a period of time. Like you said earlier on, when a company commits to a process, they need to see it through, because that's the only way you can actually really bring about change. So they take away assignments, small assignments that they implement in the workplace, and they submit it to me electronically, and then I coach. The coaching starts there. What about this? What about that? Have you thought about this? Have you tried this? Without that coaching, I don't know if we'd actually see implementation.
Unlocking solutions, helping managers build bridges, and leaders, helping leaders find missing puzzle pieces. If you were to leave the audience today, what are 3 pieces of advice that you could share with leaders out there listening to today's conversation?
Start talking to your people, getting open, honest feedback from them. And if you're not getting open, honest feedback from them, you're doing something wrong. Also, get help. Find somebody who can actually be that go-between. That's somebody that they can talk to if they can't talk to you. Because getting that feedback is critical. It's going to give you the answers to the things that you need to change about yourself. When I was a manager many moons ago, I managed a team of women, 13 of them at one stage. It gave new meaning to the term baptism by fire. I used to close the office once a quarter on a Friday afternoon early. They knew to organize babysitters. We weren't leaving until all the rubbish was sorted out. And you had time to prepare for that session. You had to come in with 3 or 5 or however many strengths, good things about somebody, and things that annoyed you about them. And you had to find a way to communicate it constructively. And the manager's cap was off. The manager had to go first. I want to know what I'm doing that works for you. And I also want to know what I'm doing that's not working for you, pissing everybody off. And that comes out. And I'm not allowed to argue or justify or deny. I have to acknowledge. I have to ask questions. But that's it. I've got to take it on board. But when each person walks out there, they've got to be intact, knowing what they're appreciated for and knowing what it is that they need to change. And that is a tough, tough process. These are some of the toughest processes a manager can ever go through. It is the moment of truth. And that's the kind of stuff that I facilitate. I'm really good at that because I've been through it myself. And I've had to take that criticism on the chin, take note of it, and make certain adjustments. But it's life-changing.
I love that. She's a trainer, speaker, a management and HR consultant. And as you can hear, does a whole bunch of good stuff in corporates and helping leaders and managers to get to where they're going. Trudi du Toit, thank you for joining us on the Lunchtime Series and just giving us some insight about why training doesn't work. I love that, and the importance of that. And please, guys, if you want to find out more, there will be links in the description boxes below. leadwithcatalyst.co.za, and Trudi's LinkedIn account will be in the description boxes below. Trudi, from myself and the team, have a fantastic week, and thanks for joining us.
Kevin, thank you. All the best.
Cheers. Chat soon. Bye-bye.
Bye now. Bye.